What happens when a legend of action films, a symbol of toughness and invincibility, faces a host who knows no boundaries in her provocations? This moment on The View became one of those etched forever in the minds of viewers. No one in the studio, not the audience, not the producers, not even Joy Behar herself, was prepared for what happened next. The View studio buzzed with anticipation. Bright spotlights bathed the stage in warm light, and the live audience, mostly women, clapped eagerly as the hosts announced the next guest. Ladies, get ready! Today, we have a legend, an icon of action films, the one and only Chuck Norris. Whoopi Goldberg declared with a wide smile, and the room erupted in applause. Cameras hummed, gliding along their tracks, while producers and headsets scurried backstage, ensuring everything was set for the live broadcast. Chuck Norris strode onto the stage with confident steps. At 85, he looked as if he just stepped off the screen of one of his classic action films. A tailored gray suit accentuated his athletic build, and his signature beard added a rugged charm. He waved to the audience with a faint smile and took a seat on the guest couch. The crowd reacted enthusiastically. Someone shouted, "Chuck, you're the best!" while others pulled out their phones to capture the moment. Chuck was there to discuss his new project, a documentary about martial arts and their impact on youth. But the atmosphere in the studio seemed to hint at something more. Joy Behar, seated at the host's table, glanced at her notes, with a barely noticeable smirk that promised trouble. Her eyes glinted as she leaned back in her chair, preparing to strike. The interview started lightly. Whoopi Goldberg asked the first question about the documentary, and Chuck responded with his characteristic calm confidence. "Martial arts isn't just about fighting," he said, looking directly into the camera. "It's about discipline, respect, self-control. I want young people to see it as a path to self-improvement." The audience murmured approvingly, and Sarah Haynes, one of the co-hosts, nodded enthusiastically. "That's so inspiring, Chuck!" But Joy Behar, who had been silent until now, suddenly leaned forward. Her voice, as always, dripped with sarcasm, but this time it carried a particular sharpness. "Chuck, that all sounds very noble," she began, raising an eyebrow. "But let's be honest. You're an action movie star. All those films about violence, shooting, fighting. Do you really believe you can teach anyone discipline when your career is built on chaos?" The studio fell silent. The audience, which had been clapping moments ago, hushed, sensing the shift in mood. The camera quickly zoomed in on Chuck, whose faint smile faded slightly. He slowly turned his head toward Joy, his gaze calm but piercing. "Joy," he replied, his voice steady. "My movies are entertainment. But I've always tried to show that strength without principles is worthless." Sarah Haynes let out an awkward laugh, trying to diffuse the tension. "Oh, Joy, you always know how to spark a conversation." But Joy wasn't backing down. She crossed her arms and pressed on. "Entertainment? Chuck, let's get real. You became famous breaking jaws on screen. And now you want us to believe you're some guru of peace and discipline? Isn't that a bit hypocritical?" The audience gasped. A few people in the back rows exchanged glances, and whispers broke out. One of the producers backstage gestured to the camera operator to zoom in on Chuck. His face remained impassive, but his fingers, resting on the armrest, subtly tightened around the fabric. "Joy," he said slowly, "I've never hidden who I am. My films are stories about good versus evil. And I've always tried to live by the principles I preach." But Joy, sensing a crack, went on the attack. Her voice grew sharper, her words more personal. "Oh, Chuck, that sounds so sweet. But let's talk about your life. You're an icon of masculinity, right? All those Chuck Norris is so tough that, jokes." She paused, expecting the audience to laugh, but the laughter was nervous. "But don't you think this whole superhero image is a bit outdated? In today's world, we're trying to move away from toxic masculinity. And you seem to be stuck in the 80s. The audience fell silent again. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting nearby, pursed her lips, clearly uncomfortable. Sonny Hostin, another co-host, tried to intervene. Joy, maybe we should get back to the documentary? It's an interesting topic. But Joy waved her off. No, Sonny, I want to hear how Chuck explains why he's still selling this tough guy image when the world has changed. Chuck leaned back on the couch, his eyes narrowing. He didn't rush to respond, but the tension in the studio was palpable. The cameras hummed, capturing every move. The audience, initially cheering, now looked confused. Some pulled out their phones, sensing this moment could go viral. Producers backstage exchanged glances, whispering into their headsets. Is this okay? Are we airing this? Joy. Chuck finally spoke, his voice low and calm but with a steely edge. I'm not living in the 80s. I'm living here and now. And my message has always been that true strength isn't about fists, it's about character. But it seems you're more interested in finding something in me that doesn't exist. Joy smiled, but her smile was cold. Oh, Chuck, don't be so sensitive. I'm just saying what people are thinking. Your films, your image, it's all about violence. And you want us to believe you're a role model for kids? Maybe you should apologize for glorifying aggression all these years. Those words hit like a slap. The audience gasped, and someone in the back rows shouted, Whoa, that's too much! Whoopi Goldberg turned sharply to Joy, her eyes flashing with indignation, but she restrained herself, muttering only, Joy, let's be careful. Sarah Haynes nervously tapped her pen on the table, while Sonny Hostin looked down, clearly unsure how to react. Chuck Norris sat motionless, but his eyes burned. He slowly leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked directly at Joy. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras and the clicks of phone shutters in the audience were audible. Joy, he said, his voice so calm it made everyone hold their breath. I don't make excuses for my career. I don't make excuses for who I am. And I'm certainly not going to apologize to someone who uses their platform to belittle others for ratings. The room erupted in applause. A few people jumped from their seats, shouting words of support. But Joy wasn't backing down. She raised her hand to quiet the audience and said, Oh, Chuck, don't turn this on me. I'm just asking the questions people want answers to. If you're so principled, why not admit that your image is part of the problem? Violence, masculinity, all that baggage. Maybe it's time for you to change. This was the moment when the tension reached its peak. Producers backstage began to panic, one of them whispering into a headset. Can we cut to commercial? This is getting out of hand. But the cameras kept rolling, and the audience waited breathless for Chuck's response. The View studio was on the brink of chaos. The tension between Chuck Norris and Joy Behar had reached a boiling point after her latest accusation. Her words, "Maybe it's time for you to change," hung in the air like a challenge thrown in a duel. The audience fell silent, with only faint whispers breaking the stillness. Cameras hummed, capturing every move, while producers backstage exchanged panicked glances. One of them whispered into a headset, "If this gets out of hand, we're in trouble." Chuck Norris, still seated with an impassive expression, slowly stood up from the couch. His movements were deliberate, but each gesture radiated a strength that was impossible to ignore. He didn't break eye contact with Joy, his gaze piercing through her. The room held its breath. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the situation slipping out of control, tried to intervene. "All right, let's all calm down and talk about Chuck's documentary, okay?" But her voice was drowned out by the tense silence. "Joy," Chuck began, his voice low and calm but laced with steely resolve. "You think you can sit here, throw accusations, and call it journalism? You call my image toxic, but what are you doing? You're belittling people for laughs and ratings. And you think that makes you better?" The audience erupted in applause, but this time it was mixed. Some cheered for Chuck, shouting, "Yeah, Chuck, tell her," while others exchanged glances, clearly siding with Joy. Joy, however, didn't look fazed. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, and replied with a sarcastic smile. "Oh, Chuck, no need for drama. I'm just telling the truth. Your image is a relic of the past. The world has changed, and you seem stuck in your action movies. Maybe you should try something new instead of preaching to us about how to live? Those words were a low blow. Sarah Haynes, sitting nearby, pursed her lips and nervously tapped her fingers on the table. Sunny Hostin, who had been trying to stay neutral, muttered, "Joy, that's too much." But Joy merely shrugged, her eyes gleaming with excitement. She knew this moment would go viral, and that seemed to be her primary goal. Chuck nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. But instead of responding immediately, he turned to the audience. His gaze swept the room, lingering on the faces of the spectators who eagerly awaited his reaction. "You know," he said, his voice softer but still commanding, "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, like everyone else. But I've never used my platform to tear others down. And I'm certainly not going to sit here and let someone accuse me of something they don't understand." The room erupted in applause again, louder this time. Some audience members stood clapping, while cameras frantically captured their faces. Producers backstage were in a frenzy. One gestured wildly, trying to signal the director to cut to commercial, but the broadcast continued. Joy, sensing she was losing control of the situation, decided to go all in. She stood from her chair, holding her microphone, and walked toward Chuck, stopping a few steps away. "Chuck, let's cut the theatrics," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're a symbol of an era when violence was considered cool. And now you want us to believe you're some kind of sage? Maybe you should admit that your time has passed?" The studio froze. Even the loudest audience members fell silent, sensing that Joy had crossed a line. Whoopi Goldberg turned sharply to her, eyes flashing with anger. "Joy, enough!" she snapped, but Joy ignored her, keeping her gaze locked on Chuck. Chuck Norris stood motionless, his face calm but his eyes burning. He slowly removed his microphone from his lapel and placed it on the couch, as if signaling he had no intention of playing this game any longer. Then he turned to Joy and said, his voice quiet but cutting through the room, "Joy, I didn't come here to justify myself to you. I came to talk about something that matters: discipline, respect, helping young people find their way. But you don't hear that. You only hear your own voice." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he turned to the audience, his gaze direct and sincere. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm just a man trying to do some good. But I won't let anyone belittle what I believe in just for the sake of a show. True strength isn't about fists, fame, or ratings. True strength is staying true to yourself, even when someone tries to break you." The room exploded in ovation. People leapt from their seats, clapping, some wiping away tears. Cameras buzzed, capturing every moment, while operators struggled to keep up with the audience's reactions. Whoopi Goldberg and Sarah Haynes clapped along with the crowd, clearly moved. Sunny Hostin looked at Chuck with respect, her eyes shining. Joy, however, stood clutching her microphone, her face a mix of anger and confusion. Chuck turned slowly and walked toward the stage exit. His steps were confident, the click of his shoes on the studio floor echoing loudly in the brief silences between applause. Security, appearing near the stage, stepped back in confusion, unsure what to do. Producers backstage were in a panic, one shouting into a headset, "He's leaving! We're losing the guest!" But Chuck didn't stop. He walked off the stage, leaving the studio in stunned silence. As the doors closed behind Chuck, the studio descended into chaos. The audience buzzed, some clapping, others arguing among themselves. Cameras continued rolling, capturing the stunned faces of the hosts. Whoopi Goldberg grabbed her microphone and tried to salvage the situation. "All right, that was an unexpected moment. Let's go to commercial and we'll be back." But her voice trembled, and it was clear even she was shaken. Backstage, producers scrambled to figure out how to handle the situation. One was already on the phone with network executives, reporting, "This is going to be all over the internet in 5 minutes." And he was right. The clip of Chuck Norris walking off the stage after his speech went viral before the broadcast even ended. Social media erupted with heated debates. Some called Joy rude and unprofessional, while her supporters argued she was just doing her job, asking tough questions. The clash between Chuck Norris and Joy Behar became one of the most talked about moments in television history. Clips from the broadcast racked up millions of views, and the hashtag Chuck vs. Joy trended worldwide. Some hailed Chuck as a hero who stood up for his dignity, while others believed he was dodging hard questions. Joy Behar faced a wave of criticism, though her fans insisted she was simply trying to spark an honest conversation. This moment made many reflect: where is the line between sharp journalism and humiliation? Does a host have the right to attack a guest for ratings? And did Chuck do the right thing by walking off, or should he have stayed to continue the discussion? One thing was clear: Chuck Norris, as always, stayed true to himself, proving that true strength is not just physical prowess but the ability to stand by your principles. What do you think about this conflict? Who was right, Chuck or Joy? Did the star do the right thing by leaving the studio? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated on stories like this.